If any of the things that I suggest disagree with anything that your instructor tells you to do, go with what your instructor says. Always. Absolutely. Today, we're going to talk about outlining. Now, this is a problematic topic for a lot of student writers. On one hand, some students claim they've never done an outline before, never seen it, don't know what it is or what it's for. On the other hand, some students think that it's the way you always start writing an essay. A lot of students who say they've never heard of outlining tend to have not had great experiences with writing altogether. I had bad experiences with math, and after a while, there were probably things that I was taught, concepts and techniques that were presented to me, just like they were presented to everyone else, but that I didn't make long-term connections for because I wasn't invested, because I'd already had bad experiences in math. For those students, this may be a better option because there's no tension. I'm just a dude in a YouTube video. For those who are familiar with outlines, we're sometimes given the impression that they are the way to start writing. And they may very well be the first thing you actually write, but outlining is not the way to start writing something. And for some things, like speeches or other types of presentations, the outline may actually be one of the last things you write. I say that outlining is not how you should start, ideally, because you should start the writing process by actually just thinking about what you want to write about. You may even think on paper, but an outline is a means of organizing the thoughts you've already had. You may also do some research, and you'd want to do that before outlining, so that you then have a better idea of what you're going to outline, what your approach to the material will be once you're familiar with it. That's not to say you can't write down your initial thoughts in the form of an outline, but if you do so, be very willing to change that outline extensively as you learn and think more. Otherwise, it can actually become limiting. Outlines come in two major flavors, which we'll discuss in a moment. But the actual act of outlining may come second or third or whenever in your process. Or maybe never. Maybe you'll learn how to outline and decide it's just not for you. Or maybe you'll develop outlines for certain types of writing, like academic papers, but it won't be a part of, say, your creative writing or your correspondence with others, like emails. Though you'll have to do various outlining assignments in various courses, that's to get you familiar with what that tool is, so that later in life, when you need it, you have the option to use it. And while outlines can be useful for papers or presentations, they can also be useful in life if you need to arrange your thoughts about something complex. Now, there are other ways to arrange items for a paper or presentation, especially early in the development process. You might try an idea web or a concept map. But outlining is nice because it's linear. It follows a specific chronological order with a beginning, middle, and end, just like a paper or presentation actually has. That's not really a built-in feature of some other methods. So what does an outline look like? Generally, there are two flavors: topic outlines and sentence outlines. Topic outlines are particularly useful for presentations or for arranging your thoughts early in the development of a paper. The items in a topic outline are just a few words each, giving just the core of that item. We'll start by outlining a story, which is a little different than outlining an argument, as we'll see later. I'll use one some of us are probably familiar with, so you can really see how outlining works. Again, keep in mind that this is brief notes on what I'll be presenting, in what order. Phrasing-wise, though, this is not necessarily how I'll be wording any of it. So, here's a topic outline of the Three Little Pigs. I'm going to start with my background. I'm going to talk about how there are three little pigs, each builds a house, and we've also got a big bad wolf that we need to worry about. In the story, pig number one is lazy, and he makes his house of straw. The wolf comes by, and pig one won't let him in. The wolf says, "I'll huff and I'll puff and blow your house in." Pig number one refuses. The wolf blows in the straw house. Pig one runs away, to find pig number 2. So, pig number 2. He's lazy, but he's smarter, and he builds his house out of sticks, right? Pig number 1 comes by and says the wolf is coming, but pig 2 says, we're safe. Who destroys his stick house anyway. So 1 and 2 run off to find number 3. Now, pig number 3, he's smart and industrious, and he's built a brick house. So 1 and 2 come and say the wolf is coming. The wolf comes and says, I'll huff and puff, blow your house down. Pig number 3 says, don't worry about it, we're safe. The wolf blows, nothing happens. He tries again, nothing happens. Tries a third time, the wolf finally gives up. So this topic outline is helpful because it broadly contains everything I want to say in the order I want to say it. If I'm making an outline early in the development process, it can provide structure as I fill everything out. For instance, I might want to add more detail in some places, so I can go back to this outline and fill it out a bit more in those spots. Or I can rearrange things, or maybe even take things out if I think I've got better content developing elsewhere. All of this is doable because the outline is yours. With the exception of actually being given an outlining assignment, most of the time the outline will be a functional map for you in developing your final product. This also means that you might arrange your outline on a certain topic differently than someone else would. If you were to outline the 3 little pigs, for example, you might include some details I've omitted, or omit some details I've included. More to the point, you might not have all the same number of items in all the same spots. There's not a single right way, there's just your own well thought out way. And since it's yours, if it's not being turned in for an assignment, don't worry too much about whether you start off with Roman numerals or letters or whatever. What's most useful is that everything is indented clearly. If an item is indented past the indentation of the previous line, that means that that new item is a part of the previous one. It literally falls under and behind that previous broader item. When we start talking about pig number 1, for instance, everything under that intro is indented beyond it. On the fly, it's indentation that will really help you understand how an outline is arranged. All that said, again, if your professor tells you any different about any of this, go with that. So, if you're giving a speech, a topic outline can provide just enough structure so that you know where you are and what you want to say now and next. But it's concise enough that you won't be looking down at the paper the whole time reading verbatim. It's entirely possible for a topic outline to become a sentence outline gradually, depending on your process, though it certainly doesn't have to. A sentence outline takes the same general form as a topic outline, Roman numerals, strategic indentations, but it's a full sentence format rather than just a few words per item. You might even have more than one sentence in an item. So again, this form would generally not serve you well in a public speaking situation where you want to engage your audience and maintain eye contact. On the other hand, if you're building an essay from a sentence outline, it's usually pretty simple to convert that finished outline into a paper, or most of a paper. So here's a sentence outline of the 3 little pigs. As I read, notice how it sounds a lot more like I'm telling the story than like I'm describing it, as in the topic outline. Once upon a time, 3 anthropomorphic pigs, brothers, decided to each set out on their own and create their own respective homesteads. However, a hungry anthropomorphic wolf with fantastic lung capacity lurked in the nearby countryside. The first pig was rather lazy and decided to make his house of straw. So the wolf came upon the house begging for food. Pig 1 wouldn't let him in though, not by the hair of my chinny chin chin. Now, being lazy, Pig 1 often relied on his brothers to bring him food. His brothers had recently been busy building their own houses though, so his own straw cupboards were bare. He didn't tell this to the wolf though, because pig number 1 wasn't terribly bright either. The wolf threatened to huff and puff and blow his house in. The pig still refused, and the wolf blew the straw house in. Pig number 1 ran away in terror to the home of his brother, pig number 2. The second anthropomorphic pig brother was about as lazy as the first, but he was a bit smarter. He had made his house of sticks. Pig number 1 came running down the lane, screaming that the wolf was coming, and he was hungry. Pig number 2 reassured pig number 1 that they were safe, since pig number 2's house was made of sticks. It's important, however, to note that the house was not made of timber and nails, or screws. It wasn't even held together by rope. It was just an assemblage of pieces of dead wood, strategically leaned against each other. Much of the wood was rotten. The wolf came by and easily blew the stick house in. Pigs 1 and 2 ran in a dead panic to the home of their brother, pig 3. The third pig brother was the smartest and most industrious of the 3. He made his house out of brick and mortar. Pigs 1 and 2 came running down the lane, screaming that the wolf was coming, and he was very hungry. Of course he was, given all that huffing and puffing. The wolf said, "I'll blow your house in." Pig 3 said, "Try it." The wolf huffed and puffed and blew as hard as he could. The house stood fast. He tried again, turning a little blue as he did so. The house stood fast. He tried a third time, turning purple. The house stood fast. The wolf gave up and slunk away, and the 3 little pigs rejoiced. And so the moral is, don't go halfway when the whole job needs to be done. What if pig number 3 hadn't been there? Would the story of the 2 little pigs have turned out the same way? So note here that I go a little deeper and have lowercase alphabetical sub-points. These are little details I thought to add as I was expanding the topic outline. This doesn't mean that the topic outline has to be less detailed, though. If I still wanted to make a full topic outline of what the story would eventually look like, I could certainly reduce those additional points down to a few words each and plug them in where appropriate. Another hugely important point to note is that it's still not necessarily uniform all the way down. You don't need to have the same number of subpoints after every point. And every essay or presentation doesn't need to have the same number of points. So then, what about an outline for an informational piece or an argument rather than a narrative? Well, though you don't necessarily write those sorts of pieces the same way, the general structure of the outline stays similar. A topic outline is still shorter, a sentence outline is still longer, while we still have to worry about sensible arrangement and clear indenting. The body paragraphs will still need points and subpoints, and maybe sub-subpoints, etc., in order to fill them out. You may have to look differently at the organization of the content as well, but that's a topic unto itself. The big differences that are important to the structure of an outline come with the introduction and the conclusion. In an informational piece, it's important to indicate from the start what you're going to talk about and why it matters. So here's a tip. Informational academic pieces have little room for mystery or suspense. Save the drama for a narrative. In an informational piece, be crystal clear from the beginning and all the way through. So the opening of an informational outline may be arranged something like: Introduction, a history of voting in Nevada. Why it matters to voters, historical trends, modern developments. Now, in a speech, this may come out sounding something like, this afternoon, I'm going to lead you through a history of voting in Nevada. You'll see why this topic is important, as some historical trends have continued to the present, while other, more modern influences are also impacting how Nevadans vote. Note that I've already started to point at how the rest of the piece is going to be arranged. The audience expects that I'm going to talk about historical trends and modern developments in that order. That's great, because now, in arranging the rest of the outline, I just have to do that. I could even stagger back and forth from one to another. Historical trend, modern development, trend, development, etc. So, that second statement that I developed for my introduction, You'll see why this topic is important, as historical trends have continued to today, while other, more modern influences are also impacting how Nevadans vote, is what I call a body paragraph summary statement. Some papers or presentations will include them, some won't. Some assignments will require them, some won't. But even if you don't actually include one in your introduction, developing one can help keep the outline and the final piece of work on track. The outline of an informational piece also differs in how it concludes. Now, of course, not every narrative is going to end with an explicit moral, but you do need some kind of resolution there. Maybe the three little pigs partied together to celebrate eluding the wolf. Cool. But how do we outline the conclusion of an informational essay? One easy way is to reverse the construction of the introduction. I'm not saying to repeat the introduction. Instead, present the elements of the introduction again, but in a rethought, rephrased way that reflects what the audience is supposed to have learned. So in the conclusion slot of a topic outline for voting in Nevada, I might say, why knowing about the history of voting in Nevada matters. Historical trends reveal past injustices, modern population movements equal redistricting, and then my kicker would be, your vote is important. Now, in a speech, this might come out as something like, so, as we've seen, a historical view of voting in Nevada reveals past injustices and inefficiencies that modern voters and lawmakers must remain vigilant of. But this issue is made all the more complicated by population fluctuations that may soon lead to redistricting within the state. For all these reasons, it is important to recognize that the vote of individual Nevadans is now more consequential than ever. Those were all made-up points, but you start to get it. You might also notice that this presentation only has two major topics. But that's okay too, because not everything is going to be a 5-paragraph essay. Notice as well that my informational outline ends with what I call a kicker. If the hook, which you might include in some later versions of your outline, while you might not have it in earlier drafts, is meant to entice the reader into the piece, the kicker is the thing you leave that reader to think upon, a kick in the pants on the way out, so they don't forget what you talked to them about. In an informational piece, this is generally one of the very few places where you can safely express an opinion. They'll always make sure it's measured and doesn't overshadow the informational point you're trying to make. If I've just given a 5 or 10 or 20-minute speech on the history of voting in Nevada, I think it's safe for me to close by expressing, in a professional way, the opinion that it's important for you to vote. The introduction and conclusion of a persuasive outline is a little different still. The most important piece of the introduction slot of a persuasive essay outline is the thesis statement. Let's say I'm still talking about voting in Nevada. Great, because now I have 1/2 of what I need to create an argumentative thesis. I need an issue, voting in Nevada, and a position on that issue. You should vote is a position, but it's a little basic, and I've already done better in the informational outline we started a few minutes ago. In a topic outline of a persuasive piece then, how about this? The history of voting in Nevada proves how important voting is today. My issue is the history of voting in Nevada. The position is that it proves how important voting is today. Or, if I want to make a sentence outline, trends in the history of voting in Nevada make it clear that modern Nevadans must be responsible and exercise their constitutionally guaranteed right to choose their leaders. Trends in the history of voting in Nevada is my issue. Make it clear that modern Nevadans must be responsible, etc., is my position. Even if you don't include anything else about the opening in the outline of a persuasive essay, the thesis should be crystal clear. For the outline closing, rephrase that thesis, again reflecting what you hope the reader has learned. Then the kicker. So, in a topic outline, my restated thesis would be, pay attention to Nevada voting history and vote to avoid problems of the past. My kicker? Otherwise, X could happen, whatever X might be in such paper. And remember again, no matter what the form of writing is, narrative, informational, or persuasive, properly arrange and indent the elements of your introduction and conclusion just like you did the rest of the outline. So, instead of directly providing links to other information sources on outlining, I'll instead encourage you to follow my advice from the Finding Information Sources video. Search for how to outline an essay and see if you find anything that can add to or deepen what we've talked about here. In the meantime, keep working on your writing. You can do it. I'll see you again.